Since then, Jamie had been waiting for an opportunity to kill his father. He had come close a few times, evenings, when his father would pass out in front of the TV, a line of drool slowly dripping down his chin. But something always held him back. Jamie told himself it was the promise he had made to his mother. But the small, honest part of his mind knew it was because he was afraid. He still remembered the pain. For his father's part, he hadn't touched Jamie or Lester since that night. It probably helped that somehow he managed to avoid the layoffs at the factory. Certainly, he still got drunk regularly, and on many occasions would slap his wife around. But things never got quite as bad as that time. There was less shouting involved now. The abuse had become almost a casual action, done out of reflex rather than emotion. Jamie's anger had cooled from the burning rage it was when he made the decision to kill his father to a low, calculating heat. He was patient and he watched, knowing that someday he would have his moment. Until then, Jamie spent his evenings numbly sitting at the dinner table listening to his drunk of a father go on about the good old days. Lester, at least, seemed to be oblivious to the dark undercurrents in the house. Even now, the 8-year-old was making faces across the table at Jamie, trying to get him to laugh. Jamie thought about trying to kick him under the table, but decided not to. He didn't want to draw attention to himself. "This town is going to hell, I tell you," his father spoke between bites of roast. "Unemployment through the roof, homeless bums passing out on every other street corner." He took a swig of beer. "And don't even get me started about the disappearing kids. That little Fontaine girl, the last one, last week. Her dad stopped by the factory today. Out of his goddamn mind." Jamie felt a hollow pit appear in his stomach as his mind registered what his father had said. He spoke up without thinking. "What? Morgan's missing?" His father frowned. "No, not Morgan. The other one. The sister, Claire." Relief washed over Jamie, quickly followed by shame. He knew Morgana Fontaine for years. The first day of second grade, another boy had pulled on her raven black braid and Jamie had shoved him away. Morgan, needing no one to fight her battles for her, turned and punched the boy in the nose. Sitting next to each other in the school office waiting to see the principal, they quietly joked about the open mouth gape the look boy had on his face as he sat on the ground trying to contemplate what had just happened. They'd been friends ever since, and for the last year or so, Jamie had felt his feelings towards her change, towards something deeper than a friendship. Her sister Claire was about the same age as Lester. Jamie knew the girl certainly. He often walked the sisters home after school with Lester dragging his feet behind them. But Jamie was really only there to spend time with Morgan. The emotions he had felt about her weren't well defined as of yet, but something in his stomach had heaved in the brief moment he thought she was missing. His relief that she wasn't was offset by the knowledge that she would surely be devastated by Claire's disappearance. Neither girl had been in school the last 2 days, and this explained why. "Mom, may I be excused, please?" She hadn't finished her nod before Jamie was halfway out the door. The Fontaine's house was only a few streets down, and he could be there in minutes. He'd meant to go see Morgan before now, but he thought of the dark looks her mother always gave him whenever he walked the girls home, had warded him off from showing up uninvited. "Back before dark, boy," his father yelled after him, "or you'll be the next one on the side of the milk carton." He had gone 3 blocks when he heard a high-pitched voice calling his name behind him. "Jamie! Jamie! Wait for me!" He turned and saw Lester running as fast as his legs would carry him. Jamie stopped and waited for him to catch up. He arrived, panting, hands on his knees, trying to catch his breath. Jamie frowned. What do you think you're doing, Sprout? Mom said I could go with you. Claire's my friend, too. Yeah, well, maybe I don't feel like having you tag along. Mom said I had to stick with you, and that if you didn't want me to come, you had to walk me back home. Jamie ground his teeth. Fine, but you stay right with me and don't do what I say. Got it? Lester nodded seriously. Right, first things first. Keep your mouth shut. But What did I say? Mouth shut or walk you home. It won't take long to drop you off. Lester grudgingly nodded again. His excitement at being allowed to come somewhat tempered. Good. Let's go. They continued down the street and made the turn onto Blackwood Drive, reaching the Fontaines a few minutes later. Walking up the steps with Lester close on his heels, Jamie knocked firmly on the door. Half turning back towards the road as he waited, Jamie's eyes fell on a dilapidated building a little further down the street, as they often did when he walked Morgan home. It must have been really something back in its day. What with its massive stone walls and windows, enormous garden, and high iron fence. But the wicker house had been abandoned for more than 40 years. The walls were dirty and the windows broken. The garden was so overgrown it more closely resembled a jungle, and the fence was molded with rust. The wicked spikes jutting on top of the post still looked plenty sharp, though. Jamie felt an involuntary shiver crawl down his spine. People said the place was haunted, and it was easy to see why, even in daylight. Quick steps approached from inside the house, and Jamie turned back as the door swung open. Mrs. Fontaine stood there, a tissue held in one hand, and her eyes tingled with red. It was obvious she had been crying. Good evening, Mrs. Fontaine. We heard about Claire. We were hoping we could see Morgana. Jamie was always careful to use Morgan's full name around her mother. Morgan hated it, but her mother was especially particular in that regard. We're terribly sorry about what's happened. Lester nodded solemnly next to him, so far continuing to obey the order to keep his mouth shut. For a moment, Jamie was afraid the woman would slam the door in their faces and send them packing, but then she bent over and swept both of them in with a big hug. Of course, boys, come in. It's a trying time, and Morgana needs her friends to help her through this. She's upstairs. Thank you, ma'am. Lester followed closely as Jamie went up the stairs and down the hall to Morgan's room. He knocked lightly and waited a moment. All was quiet. He knocked again and called softly through the door. Morgan, it's Jamie. I've got Lester with me. We came to see you. There was a moment of silence before she answered. Go away, Jamie. Her response from within was muffled through the door. I don't want to see anyone. Aw, come on. Don't be like that. Even your mom said we should come up. And you know how she usually feels about me, even standing out on your porch. Please, Morgan, Lester piped up beside him. We heard about Claire. My daddy told us she's missing. We just want to make sure you're okay. Jamie glared down at his brother and briefly considered tweaking him in the ear before he heard movement on the other side of the door. After a brief scrubbing at the handle, it creaked open a few inches, and Morgan peered through the crack. The interior of the room was dark, and Morgan squinted into the light of the hallway. Jamie's heart lurched into his throat. She looked awful. Unlike her mother, Morgan's eyes weren't red from crying, but were bloodshot just the same. Deep circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept for at least several days, and her raven black hair was snarled into tangled bird's nests on top of her head. She looked thinner than normal, as if she hadn't been eating. Getting her bearings, she eyed Lester with an appraising look. Missin', huh, twerp? That's what they're saying? That's what you think is going on? She laughed and had a slight manic tone to it, and continued for several moments too long. Jamie and Lester exchanged concerned glances before she finally regained control of herself. Sorry about that. Haven't slept in a few days. Better come in before Mom changes her mind. She opened the door wider and made a sweeping gesture with her arm. Jamie walked through the door with Lester following, gripping his hand tightly. The room was a mess and it was hard to see details in the dark, but Jamie could smell the dirty clothes heaped about the room and noticed piles of used dishes stacked here and there throughout. The only light came from a tiny lamp sitting on the desk at the far wall, the rest of which was strewn with old newspapers. A small leather-bound book that looked like an old diary or journal lay open on the middle of the desk. Morgan retrieved the book before moving to the bed, where she sat, pulling her legs up and crossing them in front of her. Jamie looked around for a place to sit before finally settling for a relatively open spot on the floor. Lester, crouching down beside him, Morgan, stared at the two boys unblinking, like a bird of prey on its perch deciding what to do with a morsel it had just spied in a field below. Jamie tried to think of something to say, but found his mind was strangely blank. Instead, he cleared his throat in an uncomfortable silence. Finally, Morgan apparently made up her mind. "What do you know about Thomas Wicker?" she said. "What? You mean the millionaire? The one whose old house is down the block?" "Yeah, that's the one, yeah. What do you know about him?" Jamie was confused by the line of questioning. Well, I mean, like I said, he's a millionaire. I think he had some oil fields or something. And he was some kind of explorer. Had all kinds of weird stuff he did in Africa and all over the place. He built that house about 40 years ago, and he had a wife, but she disappeared a few years after that, and, he trailed off. Yes, her face remained blank, but conveyed an air of expectation. "He killed himself," Lester whispered. "He killed his maid and the gardener, and then he jumped out of the attic window." Jamie glared at Lester. "How do you know about that, squirt?" Lester stared at the ground. "Timmy Boyle told the story at school, but everyone knows Jamie." Morgan's lips curved slightly up into a smile. There was no warmth in it. "That's right, everyone knows. And everyone's wrong," she chuckled slightly, patting the book on her lap. "This book, it has the truth. And let me tell you, boys, in this case, the truth is a whole hell of a lot stranger than fiction." Jamie eyed the book skeptically. "Oh, yeah? What is that thing, anyway? This old thing?" Morgan's tone was playful, but her eyes were deadly serious. "Why, nothing less than the journal of Thomas Wicker." It took Jamie half an hour to page through the journal. He didn't read it in depth, other than a few passages Morgan had specifically marked out. Lester, trying to lean over his shoulder the whole time, finally, he reached the end. "Where did you find this thing?" "Where do you think? In that fucking house, buried under piles of papers up in the attic." "You went in there? Morgan, you must be crazier than he was. There's no way that stuff in this book is true. Wicker must have been insane. I mean, he was insane. Remember, he killed those people who worked for him, and then he killed himself. The stuff he wrote in here is the rambling of a lunatic." Morgan scowled at him. "Yeah, how stupid do you think I am? Seriously. That I'm just going to believe something that's written in an old book?" Jamie frowned. "What are you talking about? You've got more?" She rolled her eyes and got up from the bed, moving towards the desk. "Loads more. The police report from the night Wicker killed himself. News articles about his so-called wife before she mysteriously vanished. And stories. Tons and tons of stories from people claiming to have seen her after they disappeared." "But that's nothing. Just ghost stories to frighten kids." He stopped as he saw her eyes threaten to overflow with tears. Angrily, she wiped them away. That's what I thought too at first, but then her voice broke into a sob, whispering, spoke almost to herself, her gaze fixed straight ahead, eyes staring at nothing. It was just a dare. It was just a stupid dare. Jamie felt like he had been hit in the gut, his breath short like the time his father cracked his ribs. Morgan, what did you do? She turned to look at him. The tears had come back at this time, and they ran down her face. Oh God, Jamie, I think I killed my sister. Jamie felt the world start to spin.